Hello, this is NorQuest College's podcast with Dr. Jody Abbott and Lieutenant Colonel J.C. Wilson. A podcast covering challenging and difficult issues affecting both students and soldiers alike. From leadership to sensitive subjects to current affairs, the podcast will discuss the issues in an open manner with an eye to identifying and expanding ideas on all sides of the discussion. The presenters may at times express their personal opinion or take a contrary position to expand the conversation and develop a deeper understanding of the issues at hand. So with us today is Dr. Jody Abbott, president of NorQuest College. Jody became the president of NorQuest in 2010, and before that had a proven track record for delivering results in healthcare with the Canadian Diabetes Association, Alberta Health, and Alberta Health Services. Also joining us is Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Wilson, commanding officer of the 20th Field Artillery Regiment, Canadian Army, based in Edmonton and Red Deer. Colonel Wilson brings broad military experience both in the regular force and reserves, with operational tours in Somalia, Bosnia, and multiple tours of Afghanistan. So I'll now invite Jody and Jeff to start the podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to podcast number 7. Today's subject, wellness. Jody.
Happy to be here with everyone today, all of our listeners, and really happy to have a guest with us today. Today we have Heather Fitch, and Heather is part of Workforce Development and Human Resources at NorQuest College and has a key role in employee services as well as occupational health and safety. Part of Heather's position entails employee benefits, and a component of that is wellness for employees of NorQuest College. And Heather chairs the Wellness Initiatives Working Group, and I think we'll hear a little more about that during the podcast today. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey. Well, I thought we should talk about what wellness is for a second, so I went to Mr. Google. And wellness is the state of being in good health, especially as an actively pursued goal. And I think that's a good way to sort of describe what wellness is so that we're all on the same sheet of music.
Right, love it.
So that to me is quite big. It's big.
It covers a wide
range. It covers
range.
Physical health, it covers mental health, and I also think it covers broad audience. And particularly at NorQuest, it covers our employees as well as our students, and you can even take it out bigger to say our community.
Yeah, and
overall.
The Canadian Forces has a Canadian Forces wellness program as well with those same goals.
Wonderful.
You know.
And we can even think of it in terms of social and spiritual as well for wellness components.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's critical at NorQuest College, given that we are such a diverse population of learners and employees, and inclusion is important to us.
Exactly.
So that broad perspective, I think it's all-encompassing. It also makes it seem very big. And one of the things I think we can talk about today is what can we do as organizations to help our employees in the area of wellness. And our podcast overall theme is around leadership in challenging times. And I would say with every organization and every employee group having multiple demands put on them, not only do we have demands at work, we have demands at home, we have aging population, caring for parents, caring for children. There's a lot going on for people. So how do we make wellness a priority?
That's a very good point, because oftentimes responses will be, well, I'm just too busy. I can't take a half an hour throughout my day even to go for a walk or to engage with other employees to do some of these wellness initiatives. So it's helping employees to find that time. And if you do that through perhaps offering prizes, which is what we tend to do, or offering some other sort of initiative to get them out there and take that break. And, you know, if it's participating in our Fitbit challenge or something like that, it gets people out walking and engaging with their colleagues and taking a break from that desk for overall wellness.
Yeah, I think part of that is it allows you to clear your head, and you can be more productive. And certainly from my perspective, I tend to be when I'm in early, I'm out late, I'm busy the entire time. Am I always as productive because I haven't taken time for lunch? And I might be at a business lunch, but it means my brain hasn't rested.
That's so true. And I know our massage therapist told me one time, Heather, you have to sharpen your own pencil first before you can, go and do other things to be as productive as you should be. And part of that sharpening your pencil, in her terms, was taking care of yourself and going for those massages, taking those breaks.
Right.
Yeah, I just think that's a fundamental thing. I know for myself, my last tour in Afghanistan, when I came back injured, and I really hadn't put physical fitness and my personal well-being as a big priority, and came back and realized I had to sort of make a change to my lifestyle. And we joke about it, but I asked Jody if she wanted to go to the gym at 4:30 in the morning, and she said no. So,
Imagine that.
So, I generally get up early in the morning and go to the gym every day because I just find I can never find time to put that gym time in. Even if I don't feel like going, I'll stretch or I'll just do some cardio and watch a movie or do something. But I find now, I guess it's, 5 years later, it's a fundamental part of my lifestyle now. Like I just get up in the morning and I go to the gym, and I think it's one of the best things. If I could speak to my younger self, I would say get up every morning and go do that and become that morning person and look after yourself. Because the difference for me personally now in terms of my fitness and my health and how I feel and everything else, I had a period where I put on a bit of weight and I was uncomfortable and didn't sleep well and all those other health issues that came with it. And I feel as I've matured in age that it's the right thing to do at the right time from a leadership point of view.
It is, and what a difference it makes when you don't do that. I'm sure you find in your day. I know if I'm not active in a day, I feel very lethargic. I get home and I don't want to do much of anything.
It's true. That's very true. So, Heather, you mentioned massage therapy. Tell us about massage therapy at NorQuest College.
A couple of years ago, we brought in the initiative of bringing massage therapy, and we just wanted to try it out and see how well it would be received by employees. And that was a way for them to take a break, a half an hour break throughout their day and go for a massage. It has been so well received, I can't actually even book it. It's booked so far in advance, which is fantastic. Employees are really taking advantage of it. And a really nice perk of that at the college is that they're actually able to direct a bill through Blue Cross. It's no out of pocket. All they need to do is show up, take that half hour break, and they walk away feeling so much better. The feedback that we've gotten is amazing.
Wow. That's
it's definitely
a great opportunity for people.
Yeah,
really
I think,
great.
And I think that's one of the important things as a leader. So if I'm a manager, and we talk about wellness, because one of the things we wanted to talk about is fundamental to your basic leadership is, in the armed forces we say know your soldiers and promote their well-being. And I think wellness is part of that. So if a soldier's not doing their physical fitness, if they're not keeping fit, they're not keeping up, at some point it's going to influence what you do at the job, because they're not going to be physically fit or they get themselves injured. And I really think it's fundamental as a leader that you have to sort of promote that lifestyle.
Exactly.
So you have to do it as the leader, but you also have to promote it within your personnel that are within your section and everything else. And this is a great example. What's another example of something? You mentioned Fitbit. What's going on right now? So if I'm here right now, is there some stuff I can be doing?
Sure. And if I can just get back to one of the points that you were making, it was very good in terms of getting leadership. And it's often difficult to have leadership buy-in because they're very busy or they're away from the office for business reasons. And so that's a little bit of what we struggle with here because we're a very busy college. People's positions are very busy. But if we can see that from kind of the top down and encourage and join your colleagues, join others going out for our Fitbit walk, which is what you were asking about. So that entails just 4 weeks out of the year we typically do it when students are back and faculty are back in the college. And we take about 4 weeks and we say each of those weeks, take a half an hour walk. Try to do it 3 times a week. Walk around while it's still nice outside before the winter sets in. And we measure our steps and we get outside and we engage with each other. And so that's been part of what we've been doing each year as a wellness initiative at the college.
No, I like that. The ability to make that part of the culture, and I think is really critical as a leader. you know, and Jody's talked about this. I mean, we all work too hard. We're spending a lot of time, probably doing more than we should, or not taking that individual time. And I find as a leader, if that's how you run your organization, everybody else is going to, you know, aspire to your example. And if your example is, I'm sorry, when the clock ticks at 8, you know, you're on till 4. If there is no downtime, there is no part of the culture, it just isn't going to function.
Right.
So you really have to set that example.
Mm-hmm. And it's a different mindset. Yeah. That's involved.
And part of it too, and I know this has always been an issue to me. I didn't identify that was a problem until it was a problem.
Right.
Right. So my superior didn't say, hey, you know, you're not working out enough. You need to be doing these type of stuff. And so it didn't become a problem until it was, and then it was a big problem. And physically I was injured, and I had to do a bunch of stuff because unfortunately the armed forces being physical, if you're not fit, you're also not resistant to injury. And then you become injured. And that's actually a big problem we're facing in the armed forces right now, is because of our, so in some cases, lower physical fitness levels, we actually have a higher injury rate.
Sure.
And that becomes a huge issue. So I think that it's that inoculation to life, you know, that physical fitness is part of that, and it has to be an integral part, both for you and your employees.
Yeah, and I think if we look at overall organizations want to be productive. They want their employees to be engaged. They want to achieve the goals. And I think that all of those things are critical when you actually develop a wellness initiative in your organization. Heather, you chair our working group on wellness. So tell us what that working group's about and what the plan is.
Sure. Our working group is made up of members, employees of different employee groups throughout the college. And we try to meet each month and come up with an initiative. We try for each month. We established in about 2015. And during 15-16 year, we brought about 2 initiatives per year to the college. And now we've increased that to 8 initiatives at the college. And those kind of include everything from scavenger hunts, which has been really popular, to, as we talked about already, the Fitbit walk to get outside and get people walking and moving. We've brought speakers in to talk about nutrition. Even our own employee, Sherry Greenbank, has spoken to the employee groups about living mindfully. So we try to encompass all aspects of wellness.
And how well is it taken up? Are people engaging? Is there more that leaders can be doing to get their employees engaged?
The uptake for some of the initiatives has been really good. One example would be health clinics. We bring health clinics to the college, and we typically see about 85 employees coming out for those health clinics. And what those do is they take a measurement, a snapshot of an employee's health right at that time, right at that day. They meet with a nurse, and they take their cholesterol, their glucose, and their blood pressure readings. And the employee can compare it year over year, which has been great. I love that we have health clinics at the college, because the feedback that we get from those employees who maybe didn't know that they had an issue presenting to themselves until they came to see the nurse, and some of the really good stories that come back. You know, the nurse identified that potentially I have, high blood pressure that's much higher than what it should be. They have then in turn found a doctor, gone to see a doctor, and some action has been taken to reduce their blood pressure. They start to feel much better. So as an organization that offers these health clinics, I'm really proud to be a part of that. And so in terms of, I guess, where you were going, Jody, getting that leadership buy-in, that's key to what we do. And I'm just not sure in some ways how we can achieve that or move it forward. We can try to engage all employees, including senior levels. But to be honest, that's been a bit of a barrier sometimes, given schedules.
Yeah, and I think we talk about tough things. So this is an important one to talk about.
It
so as leaders in the organization, and we often talk about in our podcast that there are multiple types of leaders. You have formal leaders and informal leaders. And I'm going to ask Jeff, if you were to give advice to NorQuest, because you have a very different system where you can direct things. Where in NorQuest we have a very different style and process and policy on how we work. What would be, based on your experience, some tidbits on how do we really mobilize that leadership group to say this is important?
Well, in the armed forces, we have generally a formal period where every day we do some type of physical fitness, right? So, and it's usually structural, done from a chain of command point of view. So, a whole unit will go out and do physical fitness every morning, and that's normally 7:30 to 9 o'clock. There's formal physical fitness, but what you'll find in the armed forces that we do is that we have an annual physical fitness test that you have to pass to make sure that you're able to deploy. And a lot of people work up towards it, but we're lucky because we've created that culture. When you're a young soldier or a young officer, you're participating in leading physical fitness from day one. So the first day you arrive at a unit, that is a standard that you always have. And in your heart of hearts, when you stop doing physical fitness because you're so busy, that you've left that fold, if you will, of what would be considered a normal way of doing life. The problem we're facing in the armed forces right now, a bit of a challenge, is that because of the demands of deployment and going away and being away and deploying overseas, it's not just the physical fitness part, there is a mental component to it. And we have a resiliency program that we do now, which is really, really excellent. And we talked about it during the mental health podcast, where we openly recognize that we have to make our members, the armed forces, more resilient to stress. And stress inoculation, if you want to call it that, where they have to understand how they're going to feel when they're under stress. And then as we lead to combat missions and deploy overseas when the war was on in Afghanistan, we also talked about what combat stress looked like and what happens when you come back and deal with those things. So our wellness program encapsulates a very wide range of subjects that capture a whole bunch, our foundation being physical fitness. But the thing that I've learned in my time, and particularly in the last 5 years, is that physical fitness is one of those things that if you're physically fit, I've really found that mentally I'm in a better game. Yes. And it's because I think there's a blood chemistry thing that goes with that, and your blood pressure is down and all that stuff. It all comes part of it. And I think the armed forces is taking a very serious look right now on how do we look at functional mobility and how people move and how they do things to make sure that they maintain their physical fitness, because our end state is you have to be able to deploy to go overseas or Defense of Canada or there's a fire or something like that, because what we don't want to do is be in a state where suddenly we're short personnel because people aren't fit. And we are facing a bit of it because culturally in our society today, and we've talked about this many a time, is that the average Canadian is not fit, and the average Canadian does not set time aside for physical fitness. So we have to look at, as leaders, and I always like to come back to the leadership point, is it's a sensitive issue today. If I went to them saying, I think you're unfit, you can't do that. You can't walk up to an employee and say that. You have to look at it. And I think this health and wellness, when a nurse comes in and a nurse in a closed door says, I think you're unfit and I think you need to do that. That's a different way of doing it. But you achieve the same, from a leadership point of view, you achieve the same objective because you can get that person into a program and get them involved physically, which I think is really, really critical from a leadership point of view.
It's really interesting because what I heard you say at the outset is because of the culture, makeup, role of the Canadian Armed Forces, there's clear expectation coming into the organization, particularly on the physical fitness side, and now more and more on the mental health, mental adaptability side of things. Based on what you're learning. So when you come into NorQuest College, because we're a very diverse organization, there's probably an underlying implicit expectation that you will be open to diverse cultures, inclusion, etc. Next month, we'll be talking specifically about inclusion and inclusive leadership. So it's a very interesting thing that because of who we are as an organization, because of who the Canadian Armed Forces is, there may be different elements that are important to us. So if we kind of step back and say, okay, in NorQuest College, inclusion is our DNA. People come here with that expectation. We also reiterate that expectation when people come. if we know that having healthy, productive employees and great citizens also means you have mental and physical health, how could we start to embed that expectation without crossing lines? Because I think we have the same dilemma in inclusion, because we are careful not to cross lines. But how could we do that from a leadership perspective, a management perspective? What are some tools or conversations that we could start to have?
That's a great question, Jody, and that, to be honest, is on my mind a lot. How can we grow this? How can we have more employees be engaged with this wellness program that we have at the college, and also be much more inclusive of everyone? So I kind of look to the leaders to perhaps play a role in that, in terms of engaging with some of the initiatives. But I guess I would ask you, how do you see senior leadership perhaps moving this forward?
So it's, so first of all, I'm going to make a little quip here that the question was, how do we do it? And the question came back to the leader of how we do it, which is it's very typical that would happen. And I think it's important, because part of what it is in every organization, it's tone at the top and what's important. And I also believe it's, how do we create a groundswell in our employees that they raise things to say it's important. So I would say the first thing is, I would say in organizations, and NorQuest is no exception, that we've tended to talk about health and wellness. We've tended to talk about health and safety as bolt-ons to our organization, unless maybe you are an organization that is the why, where physical activity is like so intertwined with what you do. So, my thinking is, have we approached it that this is a bolt-on? And as a bolt-on, that's not a bad thing, because you got to start somewhere. But I would ask the question of our executive and our senior leaders, have we truly had a philosophical discussion and a values-based discussion on how important is this to our organization,
to the corporate culture,
corporate culture? Because when you start to have that, then I think you can start to embed a few key elements in your values, because we have a great list of values. And I can't say that this is top of mind in our values. We have all kinds of policy structures, and I believe policies can be seen as the rule book, but they can also be seen as the great guideposts, so they can actually help you. So I think maybe the first thing is to have that really sometimes touchy, difficult, exciting, depending on what perspective you come from, have that conversation.
You make a very good point, because currently, you're exactly right. I feel anyhow that it is a bolt-on at the college. It's kind of done off the side of our desks. And we need to, if we want to move forward in this direction, make it more part of our culture.
Yeah.
I'll give you one of my pet peeves from a corporate point of view. So we want to have people working out and involved in physical activities and stuff like that. But the gym doesn't open till 8. Right? And it closes at 5. Okay, what message are you sending there?
Yeah.
You're saying, I want you to carve out some time, even though we know you can't. That's why for me, a 24-hour gym is like the most important thing. When I get up in the morning at 4:30, 4:45, I go to the gym, and if I do a 2-hour or 1 hour workout or whatever, it's there. But if the gym, the previous gym I went to, opened up at 5:45, I found that like a giant pain in the butt to try to get my day going, because the hours were restrictive. And I think culturally, as a corporate culture, you can't have the things at the same time. If you want to promote it, you've got to make it accessible, and you've got to make it so there's promotion programs. And you mentioned some activities and leaders, but if you go and see the leader in the gym every morning, other people are going to go to the gym in the morning. And if it becomes part of the corporate climate, that's a norm that we expect people to do. And sorry, Jody, I'm not calling you out, saying, "Why aren't you
Oh,
at the
yes,
gym
you
at
are.
5:30 in the
I know
morning?"
you are.
And for the record, one
I
time
know you are.
I did ask her if she wanted to go to the gym before a podcast, and I said, around 5 o'clock, and she said, no.
Yeah.
I actually think you said 4 o'clock.
Yeah, it's
and I'm
4:30 is the
sorry,
normal
but
start
that's
date.
just.
I can't say as I blame you, Jody.
I think that's
No.
just that's
10 years
just
ago, I would have said
too
the same
much.
thing. But it goes to the point of,
Yeah.
if corporately we don't have those things, if we have certain activities, but it's not part of the time. So it can be as simple from a corporate point of view, not to say NorQuest, but say you're a business, subsidized gym memberships or corporate gym memberships so that you get a reduced rate. So you encourage people to go there. Or saying, listen, I'm going to pay a half an hour every day. You come in at 7:30, but I'm paying you from 7 because I want you to go to the gym. But you only get that half hour if you go to the gym,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's only a little bit of that overall workout, but it will create a culture where the people will go to the gym in the morning.
Well, and that speaks to me a little bit as well, because we do actually offer gym memberships at the college for a reduced rate. We actually get the seniors rate at McEwen. So that speaks to me in terms of, maybe myself, my team, we have to promote that a little bit more. We do speak to it when we have new employees starting at the college, but maybe we need to, continue to promote what we have in the college. We belong to the City of Edmonton corporate wellness program as well, which gets employees reduced rates if they want to attend a rec center or take a walk at potentially Fort Edmonton Park. We do offer some reductions there. So, that speaks to me as someone who is looking after the wellness program at the college, that get out there and promote as well a lot more.
Yeah, and there's a lot of companies that just want to add your corporate logo to their their company logo, and they'll give you some type of discount. Hey, you get 15% off at the running room. Given that the president of the running room is an honorary colonel of one of our regiments, they'd probably be pretty open to those type of things. But that's the kind of thing they do, where you go in and go, hey, you can get a deal on being part of NorQuest College, you get a deal on running shoes and other activities. Yeah. But I think it's that mentality that is a positive contributor, that we want you to do it, and then we're interested in your well-being. Because I think sometimes that's what's missed in big machines of business and companies, is that it's just a giant machine and you're just thrown into the machine. Whereas as a leader, if you're looking after their wellness, and that's part and parcel of you as a leader, to make sure that your people are healthy, promoting that physical fitness component, I think, is something too. I know, Jody, you mentioned walking meetings. I think that's a wonderful idea.
I was at an event the other day, and an employee approached me and said, "Oh, sorry, I've got my running shoes on, but I just came from a walking meeting." And I said, "Okay, tell me more about your walking meeting." And I was really blown away, because not only is this employee doing walking meetings with her colleagues, but she's also doing it with our external partners. So when she goes out to meet with an external partner, instead of saying, let's go and sit in your boardroom for an hour, let's take a walk and let's do that work in a different environment. And what I think is, and I can tell you, we don't do walking meetings at Executive, and we should, because we sit for 3 to 4 hours. And I was recently at a session with an executive search firm where they had brought in a neurologist who talked about how productive and attentive can you stay. And I can't remember exactly the amount of time, but it was something like every 45 minutes to an hour, you should actually take a 15 to 20 minute break. So if you think about, if you're in a meeting, and maybe in a meeting you need to have the dreaded PowerPoint, or you need to be watching a video or whatever. So you organize your meeting around that, and you say, the first half of the meeting is going to be this. Then we're all going to head around the block, and we're going to take a walk, and we're going to talk about the other pieces. And I think what happens is, not only are you getting active, but I also believe you can shorten the time of your meetings, unless you get so into your walking part of it that you're gaining something else other than just what your content of the meeting is, because we spend so much time sitting and talking. And are we really engaged from a brain side of things because we're tired. And after a while, it's like, here's the next agenda item. Here's the next agenda item.
That's so true. And it's interesting you would mention that. I was just reading the other day about the 45-minute time frame, and then your brain does kind of shut down. So I think as a an organization, we have to have a different mindset, as you were indicating, and take that break after the 45 minutes, because you're right, you're in 2-hour meetings. By the end of it, you're kind of frustrated with where things are going potentially. You've become sluggish. You're not thinking as clearly as you would if you had a bit of movement exercise, get the blood flowing to the brain again so that you're able to think and be more productive in the end. And as you say, shorten that meeting.
Yeah. And I know with the build of the Sigmar Center and with the renovation of the Heritage Tower, we've also arranged that I think it's all desktops have the capacity to stand.
Yeah,
and so
cool.
you can actually switch your position. All of that, I think helps.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it. The next thing I think we should transition to is that because this is part of it. This is all part of stress management.
Yes.
At the end of the day, the physical fitness, you're more resilient to stress if you're physically fit, and that's a component of it. And one of the things that I always think is missing at times is that when you're a new employee and everything else, you don't know how to manage stress or prioritize and look at what you do and for your work. And I've always found in the military we're kind of good in some cases that you may have 20 competing activities, but what you need to do is you need to prioritize. And then I actually do a list. With my great 8x4 cards, I'll put on a list, and then as the day progresses, if my priority changes, I'll swap that list out so that I'm going through things in a logical manner to get through as much as I possibly can. And then the next day, what I'll do is I'll take that card, I'll take a new card, and I'll reprioritize what I didn't get done so that I can continue sort of working in a logical manner as I get through those work. Because I found when I was a young officer, I didn't have a clue how to do this, how to keep track of what you were doing. And I was taught by Rick Hillier, who at the time was a colonel, who became the chief of defense staff. And I was a young lieutenant, and I always remember this. I walked up to this colonel from another regiment and said, I notice you keep track of everything and you do all this stuff. Like, how do you do it? And he took a half an hour out of his day and showed me how he takes his day timer and basically writes down the activities in priority. And then as the day progresses, changes the next priority onto the next page. So each page, he captured all the stuff that he needed to be doing so he didn't miss anything, and then reprioritized it so he was constantly going through. And I thought that was a great skill that up until that point, we had no training in the armed forces about how do I organize myself to prioritize stuff so I can minimize the personal stress and the panic and the anxiety of 1,000 things that we're trying to multitask, but in reality you're achieving none of them.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I find myself at that high stress when I have stuff stacked on my desk. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what it is it's just the pile has grown because it all needs to be filed. There's no work to be done in there at all except to file it either in the garbage, the shredder, or the file cabinet. But because I'm rushing and running, it's just stacking. And every day I come in and I look, that pile gets bigger, and it's, oh my God, what am I going to miss? There's something in there that probably I'm going to miss. And then someone's going to be saying, hey, you didn't respond to me. I need this. You didn't follow through. So I think it is part of that is knowing personally what creates that stress for you, so that then you can figure out what do I need to do to manage it. And there will be times, I think, with all of us that we can't even see and figure out what's causing it and what to do about it. And that's where having really good colleagues that come to you and say, okay, I'm watching you and you're spiraling, or Lorraine coming in and helping me saying, okay, I'm sitting down with you and we're going through this pile right now.
I need a Lorraine.
Yeah, I think we all need a Lorraine. But I think it's also being open as an employee to all of the great colleagues around you that will notice things that you might not.
Yeah, and I think that's great being part of a team, when people realize, like, we were talking about before we started the podcast, I used to have a boss who at the end of the workday would walk around and see who was still there post sort of dismissal time. And he would say to you, what are you working on? And he would just, what are you working on? Okay. And he'd just take a note of it. Then a couple of days later, he'd come in, what are you working on? And then his view was, hey, wait a minute. If one of my employees is here late every night working on this project, I have failed as a leader because I did not fairly distribute the workload within the team, because that person is always late working on that. Now, it might have been the person was not very effective or stuff like that, or whatever.
Right.
But at that point, that was his first sort of test of, am I doing things right? And then often what the result was that there would be a redistribution of some of the work, or an understanding of, yes, we've got this big deadline, and it's just this is a one-off thing. But if it's constantly the same group, then one person clearly has a greater part of the workload, clearly more of the stress, and is probably starting a spiral where there's going to get worse and worse and worse. And so I always thought that was a really good thing from a boss point of view, to come in and see that and say, okay, not be judgmental. No, go home, stop doing what you're doing, because maybe that assignment is important. But just took note. Hey, what are you working on? Okay, all right, let's talk about it. And so in this case, we had a number of projects, and my boss came to me and said, hey, listen, these two people are always working late. We need to look at how we're dividing. And so we reorganized some of our functions in the office to make sure that it was more clearly split out. And at that point, I kind of made it a rule that if you were going to stay past a certain time, you had to see me first, so that the next day I could redistribute work if we needed to be. So I think it's a mentality as well about that stress and part of a team. But I think that's exactly what you're saying, is that we're all part of a team, and we look at that, and the team needs to succeed. So, this all becomes part of that stress management skill.
Exactly. And if that means removing the clutter in your life or in your office, then steps need to be taken to do that. And what a good boss you had to really take a look at that and question, why are you here? Be it other issues, or is the work needing to be relooked at?
Yeah.
Well, I think as well from that example, there was the piece that your boss dealt with on what's the workload, what do I need to do to redistribute. But he also looked at himself and said, what do I need to do differently? And what's great about that is the personal accountability that he took as being part of that team. So he knew that he had the mechanics of what might need to be fixed, but he also said, okay, can I be doing something differently? And I always, from a stress perspective, and people who don't know me, people who do know me know that I work long hours. I choose to do it because I love my work. But I might also be imposing something on others. So I tend to, on the weekend, I do not work typically on a Saturday, and on a Sunday morning, I got to catch up on email. So my team, the executive team and the group that works directly with me, know that they can expect a bunch of emails from me. I don't expect them to respond to those emails on a weekend. However, some will, some won't, but they may think because I'm sending them that then I've created an expectation that they must respond. And it's interesting because when you look at that, I had a colleague years ago who figured that out, and she said, gee, when I'm sending emails at 4 a.m, at 10 p.m, or on a weekend, I'm probably causing stress for my people, because they don't know, do they have to respond? Don't they, is it urgent? Isn't it urgent? And so she took a different tact. And what she did is she stacked her emails. So if she worked all weekend, she stacked them to all be delivered at 8:30 the next morning. Yeah, people figured that out really quickly. And it was like, oh, she was just working all weekend. And now I have 50 emails that I have to deal with because she was working on the weekend, and they've all come in at 8:30 in the morning, and you've just caused more stress. So part of that, I think, is understanding our colleagues and what causes them stress, what doesn't cause them stress, who are you as a person. And my view is there's always this debate on work-life balance. To me, that doesn't exist. I have passion for the work. It's not about how much time do I spend doing this and how much time do I spend doing this. Because when I start to do that, that causes me stress. But Heather, that might be totally different for you. So it goes back to have a conversation with, okay, if I do this and send you an email, is this causing you stress? And how do you want me to help you to get all of our work done?
Yeah, you make a very good point, because I think sometimes that sets others up for stress if they are seeing those emails coming in on the weekend and you're thinking, oh, that's the example I need to follow. And so I think a clear communication is critical in order to potentially alleviate that stress from those individuals who are feeling that I have to perform or work those hours that my superior is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have to be, as a leader, you have to be mindful of the impact that you have about what you say and do. You know, if you say, hey, that's to be done by tomorrow, you're telling that person maybe you have to work late tonight. You know, I think that's one of those things as a leader where you have to look and you have to understand yourself. You know, if you're saying that to the person, you know, I had another boss who, they would say to me, listen, I want you to leave every day at 4:30 without exception, because when I ask you to stay late, it's going to be an exception, right?
Because I need that.
Because I need it. And it wasn't just casually, it was a deliberate decision that I'm asking you to work late. And I always felt that, because in the armed forces, we're kind of 24/7, depending on what job you're doing. You know, there is no sort of, we have a general time that you cut off, but that we were very mindful of the work-life balance. And for me as a reservist, so I have a day job, I have my reserve job, and then I have family, you know, my lifestyle. And since I handed over command, I can tell you there's been a huge difference, because I don't have a BlackBerry, so I'm not reachable 24 hours a day. My regimental sergeant major from the regiment sent me an email, and it took me like 2.5 days to respond because I didn't check my military email for 2.5 days. So it was blissful, you know, to do that type of stuff. But it just shows that I can tell you there's a huge difference in terms of the stress and what am I doing next week. It really does change it. But you as a leader have to be mindful of what you're doing. You just can't sort of throw assignments out. You have to be mindful of those impacts and how you can present that information, those do-outs and feedbacks.
So one of the things that we're seeing as we all age is the sandwich generation, where you may still have children. They might be teens or adult children, and you're also dealing with aging parents. Heather, with the work that the college is doing, how do we support people in that, or are we even seeing it as a potential challenge right now?
Right. Good question, because a lot of us are in that sandwich generation. We do have an employee and family assistance program in which we do direct individuals or employees who may be coming forward with some sort of struggles in that area. So we're asking them that they, you know, work with LifeWorks, reach out, see what kind of tools they can offer to, you know, help them, put them in touch with the right resources, potentially help them cope a bit better with that. And we do offer days at the college for family illness. If, for example, you have to take an aging parent or a child to an appointment where nobody else can do that for them, just to be there for them, things like that. So we definitely do have some offerings that employees can certainly use.
So part of my question there really is it's the matter we're dealing with as a sandwich generation, but it also is a reality that our world is changing. So we're seeing, you know, significant increase in mental health challenges. It's something that, you know, if you go back in history, certainly there's been conversation about mental health, but it had significant stigma. It's more talked about now. We've seen a shift in social issues that are impacting us. We're seeing aging generations. So part of that is as a manager. So when you're leading in an organization, I think it's also the message of don't think that everything is static, because one employee may be dealing with one piece, another employee something else, and it makes it really hard for managers and leaders, because it's like sometimes I think we all feel as a manager and a leader that we have to be all things to all people. And that also causes stress on the manager and leader because they have a job to do. They also have a family. They have their own stresses, but they're also everybody's coming to them for everything. So how do we cope?
And that's a very good point. I've seen it where a manager is very concerned about an employee and they come forward with the stress of that themselves. So it definitely is a challenge. One thing we have offered that is fairly new to the college within the last 2 years, we offer psychological services for employees as well, so that we're seeing a huge uptake in that, which is fantastic. Those conversations are out there, and it's becoming a much more open topic. And the numbers that we're seeing of the usage of the psychological service and even our employee assistance program, we have some of the highest numbers in comparison to other PSIs or even other industries. So that's really good. It's not a negative. It's that people are using the services that we're offering to them, and the employees are hopefully able to get in to become a more well individual.
Yeah, the Canadian Forces has some great programs. Like we've got the Canadian Forces Morale and Welfare Services, which encompasses a whole bunch of different programs for families and stuff like that on the bases and when we deploy overseas and all that kind of good stuff. And I think it as a leader, as part of your tools in your toolbox, you need to be versant with this type of stuff. You need to know what's available. Because as we sort of identified, when a person has a problem, ideally, if you've created the right leadership environment, they're going to come to you and say, hey, listen, I'm having some issues with this.
Right.
And you as a leader need to understand the tools in the toolbox to say, here is some things you can do it. Not saying it's not your job to necessarily solve that problem, but it's probably your job to get them on the path to get to the right help that they need. And so I feel very strongly that as a leader, you should understand who are your resources, what do you have, what can you do to get that person back on track and back on that wellness path. And I think that's one of the great things. And Jody's got a chance to meet the regimental padre from my regiment, a wonderful fellow. And Cy is a great fellow who's our regimental padre, talks to the soldiers, and he's my first person when a person start having issues. Because one of the problems we have in the armed forces, and most business will have the same thing, is that because there is a hierarchical approach, if they don't want to talk to you direct, you need to have a mechanism by which they can go talk to somebody in parallel where they can get the help and the system is looking after them, but they don't feel that there's a leadership or a chain of command penalty for taking that. And that's been a really hard one for us on the mental health side, on the armed forces side, is that people felt it was a sign of personal weakness if they went and asked for help on the mental health side.
Right.
And in our podcast, when we talked about mental health, I mean, we went over that at length, but it is one of probably the bigger stigmas that we had to move past. No. At the end of the day, from an armed forces perspective, or me a leader, I want you well so that you can do your job. It's really that simple. And as a leader, you need to understand that is the requirement for you as a leader, is to make sure you get them as well as quickly as possible. And I think that's one of the things that's great about the college here, is that there's a wide range of programs that people are uptaking it. And that shows to the leadership of the culture that people are uptaking these programs and doing these things and being involved. And I think that in the long term will pay dividends, because a happy employee is going to be retained. Corporately, you don't pay money to have to constantly be retraining new people because you're divesting people at a higher rate. So you're spending all this corporate money on training and onboarding people when you don't have to. And I think that from a leadership point of view, that's one of the key sort of facets of wellness, is that there's a profit imperative that goes with it. It actually is part of wellness, is that your company can actually make more money if your workforce is well and you retain your employees.
I want to talk about removal of stigma, more people coming forward. I think that's a really, really good thing. I'm going to flip that though. So we have, for example, in our Growth and Harmony Center with our students, 400 to 500 students a month go through that center. So we offer basic health services as well as mental health support, immigration support, settlement support, etc. So those are the kinds of services we have. So, and I also heard Heather say that we're seeing an uptake on psychological services. So On the one hand, this is a very good thing because it means that people are comfortable coming forward to seek the help they need. The flip side of that, whether it be a student population or an employee population, can we learn about the triggers that are sending people to those services? Because what I worry about is you could take the flip side of it and you can say, well, if we have so many students and so many employees coming to seek these services, is there something the organization, and not just NorQuest College, any organization needs to learn from that? Because is there something in our own systems that are not supporting people? Are we adding a layer of challenge, difficulty that's adding stress to people unknowingly? And so, Heather, I would ask from an employee perspective, can we get data from our insurance company without breaching confidentiality, but just general information that can help the organization then to say, we need to do something different?
Yes, we actually do receive some of that data. It is extremely confidential, and because of our size or the number of claimants coming forward, they often group because they don't want to potentially and point out just, only 2 people came forward for this issue and that sort of thing. So we do have statistics in terms of some of the issues that are presenting, if they're family issues, if they're work-related stress issues. So we do get that, and you do make a good point that, perhaps we can dig a little bit deeper into those statistics and see and offer different, perhaps different programs or different speakers to come in to address some of these issues, in terms of work-life balance. Maybe there are other things that the organization can take a look at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's the data can help tell the story that it might not give you the answers, but it might point to something we're doing in the organization that, boy, we need to pay attention to that.
Right.
Or, as you said, let's shape some programming around that so that we're not just pulling out of the air what the program should be. So it's using that data in the best way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In the Canadian Forces, we have a number of feedback loops to bring that to the corporate level. I think it's, I hate using that word, but to bring that feedback. And we've done a lot of changes over the last 10 years. There's been a lot of transformation where we've changed our approaches on a number of things, physical, mental, lifestyle, things that we do. That have really made a difference in the long run. And I can tell you the Armed Forces today is not the Armed Forces of, say, that I joined, I won't say when, but a long time ago when I joined the Armed Forces. It was very different and how we operated. And part of that is adapting to change. Part of it is the social environment. But I think any business has to look at it from that perspective of, clearly there's a problem if you got to serve this one issue that's continually coming up.
Right. And even removing this is more of a bolt-on, as Jody had alluded to before, and make it much more part of our culture so that we can devote the time and the energies towards looking for this, because in the end, I think it will just result in a much better workplace and workforce.
Yes.
Because the more comfortable I think an employee feels that you have their back, and I think we've talked around it a couple of times that corporately, the college has your back when you're doing a number of things, and there's services, and the corporate culture is one of inclusion and working with people and all that stuff. That when we look at it from a perspective of a business, that has to be part and parcel of the very focus of the corporation, so that the employees feel comfortable. And if they feel comfortable, then everything else sort of comes into play. Retention comes into play, mental health, wellness. It's all part of it. So it's not a bolt-on. It's actually an integral part of sort of the leadership concept for any organization. The stress management portion of it is a portion of how you conduct your business. The wellness programs is a portion of that, so that you can be, because one of the things that always struck me, and I've worked in other industries on my civilian side, is that I was struck by the acceptance of loss of employees. It's like, well, they don't like it back, they can leave. And I was like, you spent a bunch of money training this person up to do their job, and then you don't get a period of time out of them. You've lost money. It makes no sense to me. But what was happening was their view was, well, they haven't been around long enough. It doesn't really matter. And the problem in a lot of cases, that doesn't come from my budget. So I don't see that loss. It comes from the corporate budget, so I don't care. But actually there is a cost. There's a huge cost of constantly losing employees. That as a leader, you should be very concerned about that. Why are people leaving your industry? And in one business I was working with, it was like 25 cents wage difference. It was literally 25 cents an hour. That's why they were leaving. And I was like, okay, that's crazy. We're spending 100 times that on training for the 5 or 6 days of training to get them ready to go. And really the difference was from 4 or 5 people leaving the business was 25 cents an hour.
Wow.
But that's the truth. And that's why this feedback loop is pretty important.
Yeah. So I think we're getting to the end of our time. I want to ask 2 questions. So the first is, if you could give, Heather, advice to a manager on how to enhance employee wellness, what's one tidbit that you would give them?
Good question. I think what comes to mind is be aware of the resources that we have at the college and ensure that that the employees know what those resources are and where to find them. There's so much information on the queue. Our Employee Family Assistance Program is run through LifeWorks. We've got the password up there. They have so many tools and resources. And just kind of maybe keep an eye on your employees and, see if you have a conversation with them, if you feel they're struggling, maybe where you can potentially direct them.
Great, thank you. And
so the one thing before we close out, I'd like to talk about is that something that was brought to my attention that I think is really important is re-energizing. So at the end of the day, all this stress and wellness, is that one part that we sometimes forget about is re-energizing. And one of the things that I think is important is like having a hobby or something that you do that's how you re-energize. And it can be a wide range of things, but I think as a leader as well, you need to identify the person who doesn't really have a hobby, that work is their own. And again, Jody, I'm not picking on you, that work is the only thing. It is important that you re-energize, and you have to find it. Is it going to the lake and going canoeing? Is it, you play a video game or you do something? That's something that allows you just to take your mind off stuff and re-energize and get yourself back into the game. And I think sometimes we don't give enough credit to that as an activity, that whatever it is, you need to have a hobby. And I think it makes a huge difference. And I'll use an example on the military side for veterans. A lot of veterans with PTSD, I was reading a study just this week, have gotten into metal detecting. And so in the UK, they have a huge program with metal detecting where they actually provide it and they give places to go and everything else. And the idea is it's something that's outside and it's something physical and you're with a group with like peers, but you're doing something. And what they've found is that it significantly reduces the symptoms of PTSD. And it was very, very helpful for the people serving because it was a hobby and it became a hobby. Because before, maybe they didn't have a hobby. Maybe they didn't have stuff. They were just sort of singularly focused. By having that hobby and groups of other people and things that they do, it's kind of important. And I think online hobbies aren't necessarily a good hobby. It's something where you're physically out doing something. So I just thought that would be a good way to close, to talk about re-energizing and the importance of it. So.
Yeah, and I would say for me, even if I'm not at the gym with Jeff at 4:30 in the morning, I think the re-energizing for me, there's a couple of things. I love to cook. And so
taste your tiramisu, it's very good.
So that's the piece of, people would say, oh, that's work for them. For me, it's enjoyment. It's creative. My involvement in figure skating, really, really important. And it just allows my brain to switch into something different. And I think sometimes when people see that you're involved in so many things, they're like, you're overloading yourself. And it's when I say I don't think work-life balance, I don't like that term anymore, because to me, it melds together. And as long as I take time to do those things that allow me to re-energize or spark my creativity or, spend a little more time with family or go to the beach, that time is precious time. And we have to carve that out
it has to be protected.
for ourselves.
You have to recognize, you have to re-energize. Yeah. And I think that's the point, is that if you don't recognize it, you just get into a slump and it becomes sort of a mental health piece where you're in a physical, you get a little bit depressed, you're just always down because you're just not bringing yourself back up to 100%.
Yeah.
Right, so true. And you have to take that time to redirect your thoughts,
Yes.
and re-energize and just enjoy life too.
So that brings us to the end. Please, any questions or comments you have, please go to podcast@norquest.ca, and you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play.
Yeah, and we're really looking for comments. So if you've got an idea or something you'd like to talk about, some hard leadership issues or questions, that's what we're looking for. So drop us an email and let us know, because we'd really like to cover those subjects.
Questions on today's subject can be sent to podcast@norquest.ca. Remember, a conversation is the informal exchange of ideas by spoken word. Don't be afraid to have the conversations on issues that affect us. Dialogue, conversation, and understanding, regardless of your side of the discussion, is a Canadian strength. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you will join us again for a future podcast.